Another debate over gun rights following the concert shooting in Las Vegas, and the one thing that Republicans, Democrats, and the NRA can agree on.
What the national health experts have said, no matter what, expect that you could have this could linger in some form for another year or more.
Stepping up efforts to stop the hepatitis A outbreak in San Diego, and just how much the county may have to pay for it all.
Sometimes it's just a tough piece of life as a cancer patient, is that a scan is something you have to do whether you like it or not. And so sometimes you just have to suck it up and go for it.
And the fear and anxiety of cancer screenings. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Amita Sharma, filling in for Ebony Monet. California officially became a so-called sanctuary state today after Governor Jerry Brown signed legislation limiting contact between local law enforcement and federal immigration agencies. Under the new legislation, police will be barred from asking people about their immigration status. Governor Brown released a statement following the signing, saying that local officials will no longer do the work of immigration agents. He also says the new law won't prevent federal agents from doing their jobs. The measure came in response to widespread fear in immigrant communities following the election of President Trump, who made limiting immigration and stepping up deportations a cornerstone of his campaign. A spokesman for the U.S. Department of Justice said in a statement the move, quote, undermines public safety, national security, and law enforcement. The law goes into effect January 1st. Today was the deadline for participants in the popular DACA program to renew their status, but Homeland Security officials say tens of thousands have not done so. Having DACA status temporarily protects young people in the country illegally from deportation. Here in California, the Department of Education and State Teachers Union have rolled out resources and toolkits to help teachers talk to their students about today's deadline. Teachers like Elizabeth Villanueva say the anxiety DACA students face hinders healthy learning in the classroom.
Providing a space here in the classroom and being open to hear their stories, being open to respect, being mindful, sensitive, and have empathy towards their story, it's very important to alleviate those negative emotions.
More than 100 school districts in the state have declared themselves safe havens for the nearly 300,000 California students brought to the country illegally. President Trump announced last month that he was ending the program. The debate over gun regulations has been heating up this week in the wake of Sunday's shooting in Las Vegas, with Democrats pushing for stricter gun laws and Republicans shutting them down. But today, a surprise pivot, as the National Rifle Association, the White House, and top congressional Republicans agreed on the need to regulate bump stocks like those used by the Las Vegas shooter that can effectively convert semi-automatic weapons into fully automatic weapons. California Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced legislation to ban bump stocks Wednesday.
Some have said we shouldn't do this now. We should wait. Now is not the time. Ladies and gentlemen, when is the time going to be there? There is no better way to honor the 59 people who were slaughtered than to take action to prevent this from happening yet again.
Feinstein says her daughter had considered going to the music festival where the shooting took place. In recent years, the NRA has been opposed to any gun regulations. Sunday's deadly shooting is raising questions about security. CTNS reporter Sherry Gyros says some are calling for more consistent screenings at the state capitol building.
I remember them running, and I just see them go down one after another, after another, after another. And I will never get that out of my mind. Never.
Lisa Fine relives the horror, watching people get killed during the mass shooting in Las Vegas. The Northern California resident says she went through strict security before entering the country music concert near the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Still, she was met with a spray of bullets.
It kept happening, the raining of bullets down on everybody. At a certain point there, he was either reloading, and we decided that we would crawl under the bleachers and be under there, and we laid on our bellies.
The Las Vegas tragedy brings to light security concerns at the California State Capitol. There are security measures, including metal detectors that have been operating after 9/11. High security doors and windows around the perimeter have been locked down. Barriers surround the building, and a protocol is in place in case of an attack.
It's one of those things that you don't really talk about and you don't see day to day, but it's out there, and they work on it between the CHP and the actual assembly sergeants and senate sergeants.
Even though officers are being vigilant about the safety here at the state capitol, there are concerns about the security entrance. Not everyone has to be screened, and that includes lawmakers.
Are you thinking that someone might sneak in as someone else and that might be a security risk?
Do you think that they should? Do you think something needs to change?
I hope not, but maybe we should consider it.
I feel like everybody should be screened, and that nobody should be allowed to go into the Capitol without being screened. Nobody.
Lawmakers like Assemblyman Jim Cooper don't have to go through metal detectors. He and others say there's a line between who should be screened and who should be trusted.
It's a good balancing act with that. You want to have security enough for the building and the employees and the visitors, but also you don't want to make it where it hampers it, the experience of coming here to the state capitol.
CHP officers say today their diligence is tough when it comes to protecting the Capitol, thwarting many incidents outside that have never reached indoors. But for people like Lisa Fine, everyone should be checked at the front door, no matter who, just like at every airport and courthouse in the country.
It's unfortunately the world we live in now.
From the state capitol, this is Sherry Gyro reporting.
San Diego County Supervisor Ron Roberts was recently in Washington, D.C., meeting with federal health officials about the hepatitis A outbreak. He has also been working with the Centers for Disease Control officials here in San Diego. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy talked to Roberts about advice he has received and the latest on the county's ongoing efforts.
The county is, first of all, has increased the number of public health nurses enormously. We've got an army of nurses. At the last count, I think it was like 300 of them involved.
Supervisor Ron Roberts is chair of the region's homeless task force and one of the leaders in the county's fight against hepatitis A. He says the increased staffing and resources have come with a hefty price tag.
The efforts that are ongoing are exceeding $1 million in cost per month for the county of San Diego, to the health nurses that I talked about, the vaccines.
In addition to vaccinations, Roberts says their focus is on cleaning up homeless encampments and getting people off the streets.
What the national health experts have said, no matter what, expect that you could have this could linger in some form for another year or more.
Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
The Navy destroyer that dumped more than 700 gallons of oil off the coast of San Diego yesterday suffered maintenance issues during its deployment this summer. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh has been tracking the story and has this report.
The spill happened just after noon Wednesday. Navy environmental spokeswoman Helen Hazy says a propeller malfunction caused the USS Dewey to pour hundreds of gallons of lubricating oil into the water 5 miles off the coast.
At this point, we're monitoring the sheen, see how it dissipates, and working on operations according to how fast it dissipates.
Originally, the Navy expected the oil to make landfall near the Tijuana estuary. The area has been buoyed to protect wildlife. By midday, authorities believe the oil would eventually dissipate. Hazy says the oil was spread too thinly for it to be removed from the water. The destroyer had just returned from a 4-month deployment in the Pacific, where it helped with the rescue efforts for the USS Fitzgerald after it collided with a freighter. In June, the USS Dewey had to back out of a joint exercise with South Korea over an unnamed maintenance issue. No word on what caused this mechanical breakdown. Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
San Diego is weighing the costs and benefits of community choice, a program that would allow city officials to increase the use of renewable energy. KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen takes a look at who is supporting and who is opposing the program.
One skeptic of community choice is Gerald Brown. He leads the United African American Ministerial Action Council, a local faith-based nonprofit. The group's website lists SDG&E as a longtime sponsor. SDG&E has tried to put a stop to all new community choice programs across California. I asked Brown whether the utility's support for his organization had anything to do with his skepticism on community choice. He said no, he just wants to make sure the program's risks are fully considered. And my question was biased.
You know, it's almost like an insult when people ask me this, because they're saying like you've been bought and paid for, and that's not true at all.
Community choice programs often provide extra incentives for rooftop solar panels, and the solar industry is among the program's biggest supporters. That includes Daniel Sullivan, founder of Sullivan Solar Power. He says his company's main mission is to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels by putting as many solar panels on as many rooftops as possible.
Yes, we have to make money in order to achieve our ends, but we're not in this business so that a few people in the company can get wealthy.
Well, the San Diego City Council will vote in January on whether to move forward with community choice. A peer-reviewed study commissioned by the city found the program was feasible and could offer cheaper and greener electricity than SDG&E. Andrew Bowen, KPBS News.
The Oceanside City Council has granted Mayor Jim Wood another medical leave of absence to recover from a stroke suffered back in May. KPBS North County reporter Allison St. John says this could be the last time the council extends his medical leave.
Mayor Wood appeared in his wheelchair in Oceanside City Hall last night for the first time since his stroke. His aide, Debbie Walker-McCauley, said Wood is grateful to be granted the medical leave extension.
And I think he's going to work hard to complete his physical therapy, which includes voice therapy and helping with his walking and balance. And I think he's going to work extra hard now to make that happen.
Wood has until December 20th to return to the dais and resume his mayoral duties. In the event he's unable to perform them, the Oceanside City Council will either appoint a replacement or put his position on the 2018 ballot in June. All 4 remaining council members have expressed an interest in becoming the mayor, so an appointment could prove difficult. Wood has been re-elected as Oceanside mayor 4 times and has many supporters, especially in the mobile home community. He was most recently re-elected November of last year, so if the job ends up on the June ballot, whoever is elected would complete the mayor's term till 2020. Allison St. John, KPBS News.
People who are diagnosed with cancer often face a long, tough battle. And even if the disease goes into remission, the possibility that it could return causes a lot of grief. The fear and anguish can reach a breaking point when a cancer patient goes through their periodic screenings. KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg says there's a term for those feelings: scanxiety.
In 2014, Sunny Golden went into the doctor's office complaining of a persistent cough. She came out with a diagnosis of stage 3 lung cancer. Golden immediately went through chemotherapy and radiation. Thankfully, her cancer is in remission. But to be on the safe side, Golden has to get screened 4 times a year. And each time, her anxiety goes off the charts.
You're like, okay, do I have 3 more months or is this it? So, and that's all you can think of. You want to think the positive, but the negative comes up too.
Golden says to make matters worse, she doesn't usually get the results of her scan for a couple of days.
You're just on pins and needles. What's it going to be? And so many people in my support group, you know, they come in and they have a bad PET scan, and you think, am I going to be the next one?
Scanxiety is not an official medical term. Even so, doctors and other providers who treat cancer patients are well acquainted with it.
Come on in here. This is where the patients change, and then the magnet is right up here.
We're in one of the exam rooms at UC San Diego's Moores Cancer Center. The magnet is an MRI machine. It's used to initially diagnose cancer or to identify whether a known cancer has spread to other parts of the body. Dr. Haiti Ojeda Fournier is the center's medical director of breast imaging. She says anxiety is one of the risk factors of breast cancer screening. To help alleviate it, Ojeda says she tries to get patients their results the same day.
The majority of the screening studies are going to be negative, so we want to let the patients know. About 10% of the patients will have to come back because we see something that needs to be evaluated further.
But Ojeda says many times those patients don't come back.
There's very poor compliance on those patients. They just don't want to come back in often, and it's usually because of the anxiety of having to do this study.
That's why at Moores, they're trying to lessen the discomfort and anxiety of breast cancer screenings by using what's called a sensory suite. Here, women get a mammography while they see images of a garden and listen to recordings of birds. To add to the relaxing vibe, the suite uses aromatherapy. Linda Hutkin-Slade is an oncology social worker with Sharp Healthcare. As a cancer survivor herself, she has a lot of empathy for people who suffer from scanxiety. Hutkin-Slade has some tips for patients to help them plan for the scan.
When are you going to get the results? Who might be with you? What your plan would be if it's bad news? Plan if it's not bad news. Some of them are breathing techniques and stress relieving techniques too.
Hutkin-Slade recommends patients bring a friend along as a distraction and plan a fun outing for after the scan. A certain amount of fear and worry is to be expected. After all, cancer is a life-threatening disease. But Hutkin-Slade says scanxiety doesn't have to be debilitating.
You know, sometimes it's just a tough piece of life as a cancer patient, is that a scan is something you have to do whether you like it or not. And so sometimes you just have to suck it up and go for it.
In other words, she says, cancer patients have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Okay, thanks.
Kenny Goldberg, KPBS News.
Warm autumn weather calling for shorts and tank tops today. Erin Calandra has more in tonight's forecast.
We're seeing some beautiful conditions here still in the southwest. Taking a look at the last couple of hours on the satellite and radar, there's really not much of anything going on. That's really the story for all of the southwest. The deserts are just warm and dry, which is not the best news for fire danger. Wildfires could easily spark around here. For tonight, 61 degrees, clear conditions. Tonight, across the region, Oceanside 51, Poway 57, Ramona 51 degrees, Alpine 54, Borrego Springs 63, and Mount Laguna 48 degrees. Should be pretty clear for everyone. Here we are Friday. We have a big dip in the jet stream. That means it's going to be pretty cool to the north and east of us. We could even see some snow in places. Along the coast, though, it's just dry and temperatures are on the rise. So Poway tomorrow, 95 degrees for the high temperature. Same story for Ramona, 95, Alpine 92, San Diego 81 degrees. We should be right around 74 for this time of year, so that is well above average temperatures. Borrego Springs 98 degrees and Mount Laguna 75 for the high. For the next couple days here along the coast, it's going to be sunny. Temperatures on Saturday very warm, 84 degrees, finally dropping down closer to average on Sunday at 76 and staying dry all week long. Inland again, it's hot. Look at Saturday, flirting with 100 degrees. By Sunday, we drop down to 85, which again is closer to average. In the mountains, it's pleasant. Temperatures in the 70s, finally reaching the 60s on Monday. Lots of sunshine, so no complaints there. And in the deserts, it's hot still, nearly 100 on Saturday, dropping down to 97 on Sunday, and then down to the 80s on Monday. Again, staying nice and dry with plenty of sunshine for everyone. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra.
There is no precedent for this year's monster hurricanes, Harvey, Irma, and Maria. An analysis of 167 years of storm data by the Associated Press shows there is no 30-year period in history that has seen this many major hurricanes in this many days and generated this amount of energy raging through the Atlantic Ocean. What's more, the busiest part of the hurricane season is not even over. Scientists, however, caution it is too soon to make a judgment about the data. When Superstorm Sandy swept across much of the eastern seaboard, it left massive damage. On Fire Island, New York, the storm left behind a breach or a land gap that threatened local communities. The National Park Service was left with a decision: close the gap or wait and see what happens. 5 years later, in tonight's SciTech Report, reporter Maddie Orton returns to the island to see how nature took its course.
On a day like this, the sea alongside New York's Fire Island is calm. But when Superstorm Sandy hit in 2012, this water was whipped into a frenzy. The storm hit during high tide, causing maximum possible damage to the area, including the long stretch of land that separates the ocean from the bay. The sea level rose, the bay level sank, and large waves gnawed away at the sand dune that separated the two. A path of water formed over the dune, and tall waves rushed to the bay below. The erosion created a divide in the land, which became this breach in the barrier island. In the wake of the storm, the Army Corps of Engineers estimated the cost of filling the old inlet breach to be in the millions. The National Park Service oversees Fire Island National Seashore, so it was left with a big decision: let the breach remain or artificially close it. Caitlin Jackson is Fire Island National Seashore's park planner.
The planning process, we came up with 3 alternatives that we analyzed. And one was to close it immediately with mechanical processes, to let it go, let nature take its course, don't touch it, don't look at it, just let it go and don't worry about it, walk away. And then the third one was to let natural processes take its course as long as possible, and that we would know whether we need to close it based on science.
Following Superstorm Sandy, there was a lot at stake. Residents were concerned that the breach in the barrier island could cause more flooding in nearby housing developments. Then there was the impact to the ecosystem. For the first time in over 100 years, water in this area began flowing freely between the ocean and Bellport Bay, a polluted section of the Great South Bay surrounding the breach.
There was pressure. The concern about flooding impacts on the south shore of Long Island was real. Typically, the Great South Bay has its challenges with water quality. We have a lot of brown tides occur every year, and that's of a concern for the ecosystem. A lot of plant life and wildlife can't survive in those kind of conditions.
But Jackson's team knew that breaches are naturally occurring and usually close on their own over time, constantly exposed to waves that move the sand back and forth, reshaping the land.
Fire Island and the barrier islands on the south shore of Long Island have historically been breached. That's just how a barrier island system functions. It's always moving, it's very dynamic, and part of that natural process is breaching.
That's important because Fire Island National Seashore is a federally designated wilderness area, meaning the national park should remain unimpaired by humans as much as possible. So the National Park Service was allowed 60 days after the storm hit to monitor and evaluate the effects of the change as it related to flood risks and the stability of the ecosystem. Charles Flagg is a professor of marine and atmospheric studies at Stony Brook University. He's been monitoring the Great South Bay since 2006.
So in that period, they looked at our data, which we had been collecting data for the previous 6 years, and we were collecting data after the breach, and we showed that things like the tide range had not changed.
Not only that, but the pollution in Bellport Bay had actually improved from the influx of ocean water.
It was clear that the exchange with between bay and ocean water was clearing up, at least Bellport Bay. So Bellport Bay was much cleaner than it had been for the past 30 years.
We can say that there has been an increase in species and species richness. So there's more animals using the area in greater numbers than before. Because the ocean and the Great South Bay is mixing water, the temperature is a little bit warmer in the winters, cooler in the summers in the bay. It has increased the salinity locally in the bay and also affected a little bit of the distribution of how water moves throughout the bay. It's not a good or bad thing, it's a change, and depending on the species you are, it might be a good or bad thing, but overall it's a natural process that we're excited to see and continue to research.
So the Park Service left the old inlet breach alone. Now, years after Superstorm Sandy, Jackson says her team still meets monthly to discuss engineering plans for closing the break in the barrier land.
The idea is that any breach that happens on Fire Island National Seashore will ultimately be closed because of the natural processes. The question is when. So we have this planning process to give us different options in case we start seeing impacts to the natural and cultural resources of Fire Island and negative impacts to the south shore of Long Island. So if there were flooding impacts or damage.
By its very nature, the breach is constantly shifting. So if it does need to be closed, there's no way of knowing how large the gap would be at that point or even its precise location. That's why regular monitoring is key.
So any design will have to be done when we know we have to close it, based on the size, the location, the depth, and all of those other factors.
You can see more stories like that one on SciTech Now, Sundays at 5:30 on KPBS. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thank you for joining us and have a great evening.